You are angrier than you are allowed to admit. And the fact that you are not allowed to admit it is part of what is making it worse. You are angry at a food system that poisons people and calls it convenience, at a pharmaceutical industry that manages illness for profit instead of pursuing healing, at a government that has demonstrated repeatedly and without sufficient consequence that the people it is or was elected to serve are not actually the priority, at a tech infrastructure that surveils, manipulates, and monetizes human attention while calling it connection, at a culture that knows children are being trafficked, exploited, and disappeared, that has seen the evidence, heard the testimony, watched the patterns, and still cannot seem to find the sustained outrage required to actually fix it. You are angry at the lawlessness that gets dressed up as policy, at the corruption that gets dressed up as governance, at the systems that were supposed to protect people, and instead, the system protects itself. Underneath all of that, you are angry at yourself for not saying the things you know out loud, for going along when you knew better, for being tired when situations call for alertness, for the ways you've made peace with things that should never have been made peace with because the alternative was too costly, too isolating, too exhausting to sustain. That anger is not a character flaw. That anger is information. And this episode is about what to do with it, how to hold it without it holding you, how to let it fuel you without it letting it consume you, and how to stop performing this idea of being calm in a world that is legitimately asking for a response. Welcome back to the Listen Bitch podcast, Rebellion Season 10, and this is episode 10. We're moving fast considering I do 4 shows a week. Okay, so we're 2 weeks in, already at episode 10. I love that. I'm Brandon Lynette, in case you didn't know. This is the episode that I'm going to go where a lot of people just don't, because anger is the emotion that nobody in polite company wants to name, especially not in faith spaces, especially not in personal development spaces, and especially not when you're a woman or someone who has been told their whole life that their emotions are liabilities rather than information. It's just data. You've been managing your anger, suppressing it, spiritualizing it, calling it something more acceptable, and it's costing you more than you know. So today we're going to name it. I want to trace it to its source. I want to talk about what it actually is and what it's not, and talk about the people pleasing connection, the boundaries that never get held. And I mean, honestly, there's a lot of toxic religious messaging out there that's training you to absorb rather than to protect. And the systems that are absolutely worth being angry about. What do we do with all of that so that anger becomes fuel for our rebellion instead of poison in our bloodstream? I am looking for sponsors. Aligned brands only, health, sovereignty, truth, integrity. Reach out at brandonlynette.com. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what anger is actually and what it's not. And I want to start with the baseline because most people have been given a completely wrong definition of anger and they've been running from the wrong thing. Anger is a signal. It is a neurological and physiological response to a perceived violation, a threat, bitch, okay, of a value, of maybe a boundary, of a person, of a truth, of a standard justice. It is the internal alarm system that something is wrong. Something has been crossed. Something is not okay and it needs attention. In the purest and most functional form, anger is one of the most morally important emotions available to us as human beings because it is the emotion that says, I care enough about this to respond. And I'll tell you what anger is not. Anger is not the same as violence. It is not the same as rage. It is not the same as cruelty or abuse or destruction. That is the shit that will happen when anger has no container, when it doesn't have a language, when it doesn't have an outlet, when it's been suppressed for so fucking long and so completely that it finally erupts through whatever crack it can find. The violence is not the anger itself. The violence is what unprocessed anger becomes when it has nowhere else to fucking go. And this distinction matters enormously because most people, especially those raised in environments where anger was dangerous, unpredictable, or explicitly forbidden, learned to associate anger itself with violence. They saw someone's unprocessed anger explode and they concluded the anger was the problem. So they suppress it. They spiritualize it. They call it surrender. They call it peace when it's really just a very sophisticated management system for an emotion That never went anywhere. It just went underground, and underground anger does not disappear. It becomes anxiety and depression and chronic illness and passive aggression, a pervasive sense of resentment that colors every relationship without being traceable to a specific source. Y'all, Jesus was angry. Let me say that again because it gets softened into near invisibility in a lot of religious contexts. Jesus was pissed. He flipped tables. He called out everybody, called the religious leaders a brood of vipers to their faces. He wept over what should have been and wasn't. He did not suppress or spiritualize the anger of systems that exploited the vulnerable while hiding behind religious authority. He called it out. He expressed his emotion directly, specifically, and without apology. And then you know what he did? He kept moving on down the road. The anger served the mission, it did not consume it. And that is the model. I know I do a lot of episodes where I'm like, I'm pissed off. If you guys watch my political podcast, Boiling Point, Faith and Fire, I get pissed off. I go on rants. Last week I went on a rant. As soon as we were done recording, I started crying. I just processed that anger and got it through. And then I moved to the next mission. It's that anger is honest and directed and purposeful. Anger says that this is wrong and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Anger fuels the response rather than paralyzing it. You guys, that is not sin, that is faithfulness. And there is a people-pleasing connection here, and this is why you've swallowed this in the first place, because angry and people-pleasing are directly, casually connected, and almost nobody talks about it this way. I don't hear anybody making this connection, but this is what happens. You learn early from a parent whose own anger was unpredictable, from a religious environment that equated anger with sin, from a peer group that punished conflict, from any number of sources that your anger is not safe to express, that expressing it costs something too high. The relationships, the approval, the belonging, the peace. So you learn to swallow it. You get very good at it. You develop the particular skill of absorbing things that should not be absorbed, of letting things go that should not be let go, of keeping the peace by making yourself the sacrifice on the altar of everyone else's comfort. That's bullshit. And you call it grace. You call this maturity. You call this being the bigger person. And sometimes, listen, sometimes it genuinely is. But a lot of the time, more often than not, and definitely more often than you've been willing to admit, it is people-pleasing wearing the costume of virtue. It is the fear of the cost of the honest response dressed up as spiritual development. It's all performative, okay? And the problem is that every time you swallow legitimate anger to keep the peace, two things happen simultaneously. One, the relationship, the situation, the dynamic that produced the anger does not fucking change because it received no signal that anything was wrong. It stays the same. Your compliance communicated that everything was fine, and so it continues. And the same violation happens again, and you swallow that shit too. And then the pile grows and the resentment deepens, and eventually, not if when, it comes out sideways in a reaction disproportionate to the immediate trigger, in a withdrawal that confuses people who had no fucking clue that anything was wrong. In a coldness, it comes out a distance, a wall that gets built brick by brick from every swallowed thing that never had anywhere to go. Number two, you teach your nervous system that your anger, your signal, your alarm, your internal indicator that something is wrong is not to be trusted, that it should be overridden, that the discomfort of others is more important than the accuracy of your own perception. And a nervous system that has been trained to distrust its own signals cannot protect you. It cannot tell the difference between the anger that is old, wounding, and the anger that is current information, because it's been suppressing both indiscriminately for so long that the entire system is fucked. It's compromised. The people pleasing is not protecting the relationship. It's slowly poisoning it. And it is definitely 100% poisoning you. And this is what it actually costs to have no boundaries. And no boundaries does not mean no limits. Every person has limits. The point at which the body, the mind, or the spirit simply cannot continue. The question is not whether or not limits exist. The question is whether you communicate them before you hit them or after. And people with no functioning boundaries, they don't hit walls, they hit floors. They give and absorb and accommodate and compromise and tolerate silently and with great performance of willingness until the floor of their capacity is reached and they collapse. And from the outside, it looks sudden. It looks like overreaction. It looks like breakdown or burnout or inexplicable withdrawal. But from the inside, it was never sudden. It was the predictable destination of 1,000 small moments where the limit was reached and overridden in the name of keeping the fucking peace. The cost of no boundaries is not abstract, it is paid in real currency. It costs your health. The body keeps the score on everything the conscious mind agrees to absorb, and chronic boundary violation is stored in the nervous system as chronic stress. The inflammation, the immune suppression, the adrenal exhaustion, the autoimmune response that show up in people who have spent years in a state of sustained overextension. These are not random. They are the body's invoice for what the mind refused to protect. It costs your relationships. Relationships without honest limits are not more intimate, they are less. Because the version of you that shows up when you have no boundaries is not the real you. It's a performance, much like Hollywood, our media, our government, all of it, performance. Accommodating, managing version, the one that has learned to make itself acceptable at the cost of being genuine. And genuine intimacy requires genuine people. The resentment that builds in boundaryless relationships eventually makes real connection impossible because you cannot be truly close to someone while secretly keeping the score of everything they have cost you that you have never told them about. It costs your calling. A person with no boundaries has no protected space for the work they're actually meant to do because every available resource has been poured into managing the emotional ecosystems of the people around them. The creative energy, the focused attention, the emotional bandwidth that the calling requires gets siphoned off 1,000 small acts of over accommodation, and the calling waits. And it waits, and the person tells themselves they will get to it when they things slow down, not understanding that things will never slow down as long as there is no protected space for what actually matters. And then some of this religious teaching around anger, around self-protection, around boundaries, it's been weaponized, consciously or not, to produce compliant, unprotesting, easily managed people who confuse self-erasure with holiness. And the teaching that says good Christians don't get angry, that says turning the other cheek means absorbing unlimited violation without response, that says your needs are less important than everyone else's because Jesus was a servant and servants don't have limits, that says protecting yourself is selfish, that says the most spiritual thing you can do is endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly accommodating, regardless of what is being done to you or those you love. This teaching has produced generations of people who cannot protect themselves, who cannot protect their children, cannot name injustice without guilt. All the soft Christians of the world, this is you. And you cannot access the righteous anger that would be appropriate response to the things that are absolutely, genuinely wrong in our country right now. That teaching is not the gospel. Jesus served from fullness, not depletion. He withdrew from crowds to pray. He did not heal everyone in every city. He had an inner circle and he had an outer circle, and he had boundaries around his time and attention that he held clearly. He told people the truth even when the truth cost him approval. He named corruption directly and publicly. He protected the vulnerable and confronted the powerful and did not perform niceness in the face of exploitation. The gospel does not ask you to be a doormat. It asks you to love. And love, real love, sometimes looks like a firm no. It looks like a line held, like walking away from something that is asking you to participate in its own dysfunction, like naming what is wrong rather than accommodating it in the name of peace. The peace that passes understanding is not the peace of suppression. It is the peace of alignment, of being so grounded in who you are and what you are called to that the chaos around you cannot fundamentally destabilize you. That is a different thing in its entirety. And there are systems that we should absolutely be pissed off about. Name what's actually happening in the world we're living in, because the personal anger and the systematic anger are not separate conversations. Food system is poisoning people deliberately and profitably. The pharmaceutical industry has demonstrated through its own documentation and its own financial incentives that managing illness is more profitable than curing it. Big tech has built engagement systems that are functionally addictive, intentional, that have been specifically tested on children, and that have produced measurable harm to mental health at a population scale, while the people who built them have largely kept their own children away from the products. The government at multiple levels and across political lines has demonstrated a pattern of serving concentrated interests over the people it is supposed to represent. These are not conspiracy theories. These are documented, source demonstrated patterns of institutional behavior that have resulted in real harm to real people. And there are the children, the missing children, the trafficked, the exploitation, the evidence, the horrific torture. All of this accumulated, documented. They're eating children in court documents, in testimony, in patterns that span, honestly, since the beginning of time. Children are being harmed at a scale that is difficult to fully comprehend by people with access to power and protection, and that the institutional response has been consistently, scandalously inadequate. This is not a fringe topic. This is one of the most serious moral crises of our time, and the anger that rises in response to it is not hysteria. It is the correct human response to something that is genuinely, categorically fucked up. And here's what to do with the anger. I do not want you to let it paralyze you. The scale of systematic corruption is designed in part to produce helplessness. That's intentional, to make the problem feel so large and so entrenched that the individual response feels pointless. It's not pointless. Every person who wakes up, every person who stays clear, every person who protects their family or builds their financial sovereignty, who refuses to outsource their children's well-being to institutions that have not earned the trust, refuses to stay silent and uses their platform, whatever size it is, to name what is true, is doing the work. The rebellion is not only personal, it is collective, and collective change is what is made of individual decisions. You have to stay grounded. Outrage without groundedness is not a weapon, it's vulnerability. The person who is chronically activated, chronically dysregulated, chronically consumed by the scale of what is wrong cannot think clearly. Mentally ill, really, and can't build effectively. Cannot sustain the long-term effort the real change requires. Groundedness is not apathy, it is the capacity to hold the weight of what is true without being crushed by it. To be informed without being consumed, to be angry without being destroyed by anger. And you have to act in your actual sphere. You may not be able to dismantle big pharma today, but you can choose what the fuck you put in your body. You can know what your children are eating, watching, being exposed to. You can homeschool. You can build your financial independence so you're not the one who missed, who's one missed paycheck away from compliance with systems you disagree with. You can use your voice, your platform, your relationship to name what is true and refuse to perform agreement with what is false, and you can stay awake when everything around you is designed to make you sleep. That is the rebellion. That is what it looks like to be angry and grounded and purposeful at the same time. There's another distinction that needs to be made because this is where a lot of people get confused and end up in the wrong place. Boundaries are not walls. They are not about shutting people out, becoming unreachable, protecting yourself from intimacy, or building a fortress against connection. A wall says nobody gets in. A boundary says here's how you get in. Here is what the relationship requires. Here is what I'm available for. Here's what I am not. Here's where a line is drawn. Here's what happens when it's crossed. A wall is a closed door. A boundary is a door with a handle operated from the inside. People who grew up in environments where their limits were chronically violated, they often build walls. We've all done that. When you finally decide to protect yourself, up goes the wall because you went so long with nothing that the only model for protection that you had was total closure. And that feels safe. I'm still breaking that shit down, bitch, but the walls are keeping out the good. They keep out the intimacy, the connection, the relationships that are actually safe and generative and worth having. They protect from the threat, but they also protect from the life. Real boundaries make real intimacy possible because when you know where your edges are, when you can communicate them and hold them, when people in your life understand what you need and what you cannot absorb, the relationship becomes a place where you're actually safe to be known and you're not performing anymore. You're not managing, you're actually present, and that presence is what intimacy actually is. The goal is not to become someone who needs nothing and is affected by no one. The goal is to become someone who knows what they need, can ask for it, can protect it when necessary, and can receive it from people who are genuinely safe while clearly and consistently declining what is not. That is the boundaried life. And it is one of the most relationally generous things that you can build because the people in your life get the real version of you rather than the managed, depleted, resentful asshole version that's been running on empty for too long. Brandon, it's time you tell us where to start. First thing you have to do is name the anger that you have been calling something else, whether it's stress or anxiety, sadness, exhaustion, frustration. Pick one that has been the most present lately and ask honestly underneath it, is there anger at a situation, at a person, a system, yourself that has not been named as anger? Like write it down, say it out loud if you can. I am angry about blank. Not because venting makes it go away, but because naming it accurately is the first step to relating to it accurately. You cannot work with what you cannot name. And then I need you to identify one relationship or situation where the absence of a clear boundary is costing you something real. Not the most dramatic one, just one where you're absorbing what you should not be absorbing. Where are you silent about something that needs to be said? Where is the resentment building because the limit has not been communicated? You do not have to address it perfectly today, but decide today that you're going to address it and that the conversation, the limit, the honest response is coming. Put a note on it and make it real. And then do one concrete thing this week that converts the systematic anger into purposeful action. Not a social media argument, but something real. Know where your food comes from for 3 meals. Have a real conversation with your kids about what they're being exposed to and what you expect them to come to you with. Take one step toward financial sovereignty, one bill reduced, one asset built, one dependency eliminated. Use your voice, use your platform, use your presence to name something true that you have been performing agreement with out of social convenience. One thing real this week. The anger is not the enemy, the silence is the enemy, and the rebellion is deciding that you're no longer available for the silence. 10 episodes in of the rebellion season. This names the fire that's been burning underneath all of it. This is the origin of the rebellion because this was never just personal development. It was never just your health, and it's never just your money or your mindset. It's the decision to be a person who is awake in a world that profits from your sleep, who is grounded in culture that profits from your chaos, who is angry about the right things and purposeful enough to do something about it. If this episode cracked something open inside of you, if you felt the anger get named, if you recognize the cost of swallowing, if the systematic piece landed somewhere real, do not let it sit. Name it, name it, name it. Move an inch, just use it. Make sure that you like the show, subscribe, leave a written review. 2 minutes, real impact. Someone out there is carrying some anger alone, and they're wondering if they're the only one who sees what they see. Your review is how they find out that they're not alone. Head to brandonlynette.com, get plugged into everything happening this season, subscribe to the YouTube channel, watch the full video versions of the podcast. The rebellion is not comfortable. It was never supposed to be comfortable, honestly, is compliance. And the rebellion is being fully awake, fully grounded, fully yourself, and refusing to pretend that everything is fine when it's not. And listen, bitch, we are not done. Not even close.